The blizzard came down like God's own vengeance that February night in 1884, turning Pyramid City, Nevada, into a frozen hell that no man expected in the desert territory. Emmett Caldwell pulled his coat tighter as he guided his mare through the snowdrifts that had swallowed the main street, cursing himself for staying too late at the Silver Mountain Mine, and cursing the weather even more for turning on them without warning. The wind howled through the wooden buildings like a wounded animal, and he could barely see 3 feet in front of his face through the swirling white curtain that separated him from the warmth of his small cabin on the edge of town. That was when he saw her. At first, he thought it was just another snow-covered shape against the side of the general store, maybe a pile of crates or discarded supplies. But then the shape moved, trembling violently, and Emmett's heart seized in his chest. He yanked his mare to a stop and jumped down, his boots sinking into snow that came up past his ankles. As he got closer, he could make out the form of a woman huddled against the building's wall, her thin dress soaked through, and her arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to stay warm. Her lips had gone blue, and her whole body shook so hard he could hear her teeth chattering even over the wind. "Madam," he said, dropping to his knees beside her. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, and even in the dim light from the store's shuttered windows, he could see they were the color of creek water in spring, green and clear and beautiful. But they were also glazed with cold and confusion, and when she tried to speak, nothing came out but a weak whimper. Emmett did not waste another second. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then scooped her up into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and up close he could see she was young, maybe 20 or 21, with dark blonde hair that hung in wet tangles around a face that would have been pretty if it were not gray with cold. Her dress was torn in places, and she had no coat, no shawl, nothing to protect her from the storm that had blown in from the mountains and turned the desert into a frozen wasteland. "I've got you," he said, even though she probably could not hear him. "You're going to be all right." His cabin was only 2 blocks away, but it felt like 2 miles as he carried her through the storm. The wind tried to tear her from his arms, and the snow stung his face like 1,000 tiny needles. His mare followed behind them, patient and steady, despite the weather. By the time he kicked open the door to his cabin, his arms were shaking with exhaustion, and his face had gone numb. The inside was dark and cold, but at least it was shelter. Emmett laid the woman down on his bed and immediately went to work building up the fire in the potbelly stove that sat in the corner. His hands shook as he struck the matches, but finally, the kindling caught, and flames began to lick at the larger logs he piled on top. Heat started to fill the small space, pushing back the cold that had seeped into every corner. He turned back to the woman and saw she was still shaking violently, her lips moving soundlessly. He had seen frostbite before, seen men lose fingers and toes to the cold, and he knew she needed to get warm fast, or she would not make it through the night. He grabbed every blanket he owned and piled them on top of her, then filled a pot with water and set it on the stove to heat. His grandmother had taught him about healing when he was a boy, back before the ranch failed and his family scattered to the winds. Warm liquids, gentle heat, and time. That was what saved people from the cold. While the water heated, he knelt beside the bed and carefully took one of her hands in his. Her fingers were like ice, the nails tinged blue. He rubbed them gently between his palms, trying to get the blood flowing again. She moaned softly, and her eyes cracked open. "Where?" she whispered, the word barely audible. "You're safe," Emmett told her. "You're in my cabin. I found you outside in the storm." "Cold," she managed. "I know, but you're going to warm up now, I promise." He spent the next hour working to bring her back from the edge. He made her drink warm water, just small sips at first, then more as she became more alert. He kept the fire roaring and the blankets piled high. Slowly, painfully slowly, color began to return to her face. The violent shaking eased into occasional shivers and her eyes grew clearer. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice hoarse but stronger. "You saved my life." "What were you doing out there?" Emmett asked. In a storm like this, with no coat, her face crumpled and tears spilled down her cheeks. I just ran. I did not think about the weather or where I was going. I just had to get away." "From what?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the rough wooden ceiling. "My husband. Well, the man who was going to be my husband. We came to Nevada 3 days ago from Missouri. He said we were going to start a new life out here, that he had a job waiting at one of the mines. But once we got here, everything changed. He started drinking, gambling. He lost all our money in 2 days. And then tonight he told me he had sold me." Emmett felt his jaw tighten. "Sold you?" "To a man who runs one of the saloons. Said I would work there to pay off his debts." Fresh tears rolled down her face. "I told him no, that I would rather die than do that. He hit me. So I waited until he passed out drunk and I ran. I just ran into the storm without thinking." "What's your name?" Emmett asked gently. "Grace. Grace Gardner." "Well, Grace Gardner, you're safe here. Nobody is going to hurt you or sell you or do anything else to you. You have my word on that." She looked at him for a long moment, studying his face in the firelight. Emmett knew what she saw. He was 26 years old, with dark hair that was always a little too long and a face that his mother used to call honest. He was not handsome in the way some men were, not smooth or polished, but he was solid and real. He worked hard, kept his word, and tried to do right by people. It was all he knew how to be. "Why would you help me?" Grace asked. "You don't even know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Emmett said simply. "And because nobody deserves to die in the snow." The storm raged outside for 2 more days. During that time, Emmett gave Grace his bed while he slept on the floor near the stove. He made simple meals from his stores of beans, salt pork, and flour, and they ate together at his small table. Slowly, Grace began to talk more, to tell him about her life. She had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a seamstress and a man who worked on the riverboats. When she was 18, both her parents died in a cholera outbreak, and she was left alone with no money and no prospects. Daniel Hallbrook had seemed like an answer to her prayers. He was handsome and charming, and he promised her a better life out west. She agreed to marry him, even though she barely knew him. It was only after they left Missouri that she began to see his true nature. "I was so stupid," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "I should have known better." "You were not stupid," Emmett said firmly. "You were desperate and scared, and he took advantage of that. That is on him, not you." Grace looked up at him, and something in her expression made his chest tighten. "You really believe that?" "I do." As the days passed, Emmett found himself drawn to Grace in ways he had not expected. It was not just that she was beautiful, although she was. With proper food and rest and warmth, the color had returned to her face, and her green eyes sparkled when she smiled. It was the way she helped him around the cabin without being asked. The way she made jokes even though she had every reason to be bitter. The way she listened when he talked about his work at the mine, or his dreams of someday having his own ranch again. On the 3rd day, the storm finally broke. Emmett woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the sound of melting snow dripping from the roof. Grace was already awake, standing by the window and looking out at the transformed town. Everything was blanketed in white, pristine and beautiful in the morning light. "It's like a different world," she said softly. Emmett came to stand beside her. "It will all melt in a day or 2. Desert does not hold snow for long." "What happens now?" Grace asked, turning to face him. I have nowhere to go, no money, no family, and Daniel is still out there somewhere. You stay here, Emmett said, for as long as you need to. I cannot ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. He hesitated, then added, Grace, I know we just met and I know you have been through hell, but I want to help you. Not because I expect anything in return, but because it's what I want to do. She studied his face for a long moment, and he saw the uncertainty there, the fear warring with hope. You barely know me. Then we'll get to know each other. Grace smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. All right, but I am not going to just sit around and be a burden. I will earn my keep. And she did. Over the following weeks, Grace transformed the cabin from a bachelor's sparse living space into something that felt like a home. She cleaned and organized, mended Emmett's worn clothes, and cooked meals that were far better than anything he had managed on his own. She found work taking in sewing and mending from other people in town, using skills her mother had taught her. The money was not much, but it was honest work, and it gave her a sense of independence that Emmett could see she desperately needed. But it was not all smooth. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the storm, Emmett came home from the mine to find Grace standing in the doorway, her face pale and her hands shaking. What's wrong? He asked immediately. I saw him. Daniel. He was walking down the main street with 2 other men. I hid in the general store until they passed, but Emmett, he is looking for me. I heard him asking the shopkeeper if he had seen a woman matching my description. Emmett felt anger rise in his chest, hot and fierce. Did he see you? No, but it is only a matter of time. This town is not that big. Then we'll make sure he does not find you. Emmett took her hands in his, steadying them. Listen to me, Grace. You are not going back to him. I do not care what he thinks he is owed or what kind of claim he thinks he has on you. You are your own person and you get to choose your own life. But what if he tries to take me by force? Or what if he causes trouble for you? Let me worry about that. The confrontation came sooner than Emmett expected. 2 days later, he was walking back from the assayer's office when a man stepped out from the alley beside the saloon. He was tall and well-dressed, with slicked back hair and a smile that did not reach his eyes. 2 other men flanked him, both rough-looking and armed. You must be Caldwell, the man said. I'm Daniel Holbrook. Emmett stopped, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver on his hip. I know who you are. Then you know why I'm here. You have something that belongs to me. Grace does not belong to anyone. Daniel's smile hardened. She is my fiancée. We came west together and then she ran off in a fit of hysteria. I have been worried sick about her. That is not how she tells it. And you believe the word of a hysterical woman over mine. Daniel took a step closer. Look, Caldwell, I do not want trouble. Just give me back what is mine and we can all go our separate ways. No. The word hung in the air between them, sharp and final. Daniel's face darkened. You are making a mistake. The only mistake I made was not running you out of town the day you got here. Emmett kept his voice steady, but his heart was pounding. Grace is staying with me because she wants to. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the marshal. The marshal, Daniel laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. The marshal does not care about a domestic dispute, and even if he did, Grace and I are engaged. The law is on my side. An engagement is not a contract of ownership. And from what Grace told me, you already broke whatever promises you made to her when you tried to sell her like property. Emmett's hand tightened on his gun. This is your warning, Holbrook. Stay away from Grace. Stay away from my cabin. If I see you anywhere near her, we are going to have a problem. For a moment, Emmett thought Daniel might do something stupid. The 2 men flanking him shifted, their hands moving toward their own weapons. But then Daniel smiled again, that cold, calculated smile. This is not over, Caldwell. Not by a long shot. They walked away, and Emmett stood there for a moment, his pulse racing. He knew he had just made an enemy, but he did not care. Grace was worth fighting for. When he got back to the cabin and told Grace what had happened, she went even paler than before. He is not going to give up. Daniel never gives up when he wants something. Neither do I, Emmett said quietly. That night they sat by the fire long after the sun had gone down, neither of them saying much. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this, Emmett?" "Really?" He was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words. "At first, it was just because it was the right thing to do. You needed help and I could give it. But now it is more than that." "What do you mean?" He turned to look at her, and in the firelight, her face was soft and beautiful. "I mean that these past few weeks, having you here, getting to know you, it has been the happiest I have been in years. Maybe ever. And the thought of Daniel taking you away, of you being hurt or scared or forced into something you do not want, it makes me angrier than I have ever been." "Emmett," she said softly. "I'm not saying you owe me anything," he continued quickly. "And I know you have been through hell and probably need time to figure out what you want, but I need you to know that I care about you, Grace. More than I probably should, given how little time we have known each other." Grace was quiet for a long moment, and Emmett felt his stomach twist with worry that he had said too much, pushed too hard. But then she reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I care about you too," she said. "I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon and that I needed to be independent and figure out my own life first. But the truth is, when I am with you, I feel safe. I feel happy. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel like myself." Emmett's heart was pounding so hard he thought she must be able to hear it. "Grace." "I do not want to leave," she said, her green eyes meeting his. "I want to stay here with you if you will have me." He did not answer with words. Instead, he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But she did not pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like everything in the world had finally clicked into place. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then Grace's free hand came up to cup his cheek, and the kiss deepened. It was sweet and warm and filled with all the things they had not yet said out loud. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Emmett rested his forehead against hers, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I will have you," he said quietly, "for as long as you want to stay." "Forever, then," Grace whispered. The next few weeks were some of the best of Emmett's life. He and Grace fell into an easy rhythm, one that felt natural and right. They ate breakfast together before he went to work at the mine, and he came home every evening to find her waiting with a hot meal and a smile. They talked about everything, their pasts and their dreams and their hopes for the future. On Sundays, they walked together through the town and out into the desert hills, watching the sun set over the mountains in the distance. But the shadow of Daniel Holbrook still hung over them. Emmett saw him around town occasionally, always watching, always waiting. And then one evening, about a month after their confrontation, the marshal came to the cabin. Marshal Tom Porter was a grizzled man in his 50s, with gray hair and a permanent squint from years of facing into the desert sun. He had always been fair with Emmett, and when he knocked on the door that evening, his expression was troubled. "Emmett." "Miss Gardner," he said, nodding to each of them. "Can I come in?" "Of course," Emmett said, stepping aside. The marshal took off his hat and turned it in his hands, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll get right to it. Daniel Holbrook came to see me this afternoon. He is filing a complaint, saying you are harboring his fiancée against her will." "That is a lie," Grace said immediately. "I am here because I want to be. Daniel tried to sell me to pay off his gambling debts." "I figured it was something like that," the marshal said. But the problem is he has documentation, an engagement contract signed by both of you back in Missouri. Grace's face went white. I signed that before I knew what kind of man he really was. I believe you, Miss Gardner, but the law is tricky about these things. An engagement is not legally binding the same way a marriage is, but it does give Holbrook some claim. He could make this real ugly in court. So what are you saying? Emmett asked, his voice tight. I'm saying you all need to be careful. Holbrook is not going to let this go, and he has money backing him now. Some of the saloon owners in town, they like the idea of having a pretty girl working for them, and they are willing to pay Holbrook's legal fees to make it happen. Emmett felt sick. You are not going to let that happen. I will do what I can, but my hands are tied if he takes this to the territorial court. The marshal put his hat back on. My advice? Get married. If Miss Gardner is legally wed to you, Holbrook has no claim at all. After the marshal left, Emmett and Grace sat in stunned silence. Finally, Grace spoke. He is right. It is the only way to make sure Daniel cannot touch me. Grace, I do not want you to marry me just because you are scared of Daniel Holbrook. She looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes. Is that what you think? That I would only marry you out of fear? I do not know. I just do not want you to feel forced into anything. Emmett Caldwell, you are the best man I have ever known. You saved my life, you gave me a home, and you have treated me with more kindness and respect than anyone ever has. I already told you I wanted to stay with you forever. If getting married makes that legal and keeps me safe from Daniel, then that is what I want to do. Are you sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life. She took both of his hands in hers. I love you, Emmett. I think I have loved you since that first night when you found me in the snow. Emmett felt his throat tighten with emotion. I love you too, more than I knew it was possible to love someone. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. The preacher's wife served as witness, along with the marshal. Grace wore a simple blue dress that she had made herself, and Emmett wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed for once. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Emmett kissed his bride, he felt like the luckiest man alive. But their happiness was short-lived. That same evening, as they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Daniel Holbrook stepped out of the shadows with his 2 men. His face was twisted with rage. You think you are clever, do not you? He snarled at Grace. Getting married to cut me out. I married Emmett because I love him, Grace said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. You have no claim on me now, Daniel. It is over. It is not over until I say it is over. You owe me, Grace. I brought you all the way out here, spent money on you. You do not get to just walk away. Emmett stepped in front of Grace, his hand moving to his gun. She just did. Now get out of our way, Holbrook. Or what? You will shoot me in front of the whole town. That is murder, Caldwell. That is self-defense if you do not move. For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then one of Daniel's men shifted, and Emmett saw the glint of a gun barrel in the dim light. Time seemed to slow down. He drew his own revolver, fast and smooth, and fired a warning shot into the dirt at Daniel's feet. The sound echoed through the street, and suddenly people were coming out of buildings, drawn by the noise. The marshal came running from his office, his own gun drawn. What the hell is going on here? He demanded. Holbrook was threatening my wife, Emmett said, not lowering his gun. That is a lie, Daniel said. I was just talking to her. With 2 armed men backing you up. The marshal looked at Daniel with disgust. I have had enough of this, Holbrook. You are causing trouble in my town, and I want you gone. You cannot run me out. I have not broken any laws. You threatened a woman. You have been harassing the Caldwells for weeks, and you just about caused a shootout in the middle of town. That is enough for me. The marshal gestured to his deputies, who had appeared from the crowd. You have until dawn tomorrow to get out of Pyramid City. If I see you after that, I will throw you in jail for disturbing the peace." Daniel's face was purple with rage, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. "This is not over," he said to Grace. "You are going to regret this." "I already regret ever meeting you," Grace shot back. "Now get out of our lives." The marshal and his deputies escorted Daniel and his men away, and the crowd slowly dispersed. Emmett holstered his gun and turned to Grace, who was shaking. "It is okay," he said, pulling her into his arms. "He is gone. What if he comes back? Then we will deal with it together." But Daniel did not come back. The next morning, the marshal confirmed that Holbrook and his men had been seen leaving town before dawn, heading east toward Salt Lake City. Emmett and Grace waited a few more days, tense and watchful, but there was no sign of him. Slowly, they began to relax. Life settled into a new normal. Grace was now Mrs. Caldwell, and she wore the simple gold band Emmett had bought her with pride. They made plans for their future. Emmett worked hard at the mine, saving every penny he could. His dream was to buy a piece of land outside of town and start a small ranch, raising horses and cattle. Grace shared his dream, and together they pored over maps and talked about what their ranch would look like. As the months passed, their love deepened. The physical side of their relationship was something Emmett had worried about, knowing what Grace had been through with Daniel. But she came to him willingly, with trust and love, and their wedding night had been tender and sweet. They learned each other's bodies slowly, taking time to discover what brought pleasure and joy. Emmett was always careful with her, always making sure she felt safe and loved, and Grace bloomed under his gentle care. By summer, they had saved enough money to put a down payment on a piece of land about 5 miles outside of Pyramid City. It was not much, just 40 acres with a creek running through it and good grazing land. But it was theirs, and they poured their hearts into building it up. Emmett built a small house, bigger than the cabin but still modest, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen. Grace planted a garden and tended it carefully, coaxing vegetables and herbs out of the desert soil. They bought their first horses that fall, 3 mares and a stallion, and by the following spring they had their first foal. Emmett was good with horses, patient and kind, and word spread. Soon other ranchers were bringing him horses to train, and the extra income helped them expand. They bought a few head of cattle and then a few more. Life was good. Hard, but good. They worked from sunrise to sunset, and at night they fell into bed exhausted but happy. Grace learned to ride and rope, becoming as capable a rancher as any man. Emmett fell in love with her all over again every time he watched her work, her face flushed with exertion, and her green eyes bright with determination. 2 years after they married, Grace came to him one evening with news that made his heart nearly burst with joy. She was pregnant. Emmett picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and that night he held her close and talked about all the things they would teach their child, all the love they would give. Their son was born the following spring, on a warm April morning with the windows open and the smell of desert flowers in the air. The midwife from town helped with the delivery, and when Emmett heard his son's first cry, he felt tears stream down his face. They named him James after Emmett's father, and he was perfect. Dark hair like his father, green eyes like his mother, and a strong set of lungs that he used frequently. Being parents changed them, deepened them. Emmett had never known he could love anything as much as he loved his son. He would sit for hours just watching James sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and the perfect little face. Grace was a natural mother, patient and loving, and she sang to James in a sweet, clear voice that made Emmett's heart ache with happiness. The ranch continued to grow. By the time James was 2, They had a dozen horses and a small herd of cattle. Emmett had developed a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the territory, and people came from as far as Carson City to buy his horses. They hired a young man named Billy to help with the work, and he lived in a small bunkhouse that Emmett built near the barn. Grace got pregnant again when James was 3, and this time she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose, and she was as beautiful as her namesake. She had Grace's blonde hair and Emmett's dark eyes, and from the moment she could toddle, she was following her father around the ranch, determined to do everything her big brother did. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and injured horses. Money was sometimes tight, and they had to make difficult decisions about what to buy and what to put off. But they faced everything together, and their love only grew stronger. One evening when James was 6 and Rose was 3, Emmett and Grace sat on the porch of their house and watched their children play in the yard. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The desert stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, and Emmett felt a profound sense of contentment. "Do you ever think about that night?" Grace asked quietly. "When you found me in the snow, every day," Emmett said. "I was so scared I thought I was going to die." "I'm glad I found you when I did." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you, when you knelt down beside me?" "What?" "I thought you were an angel. I thought I had already died and you were there to take me to heaven." Emmett smiled and kissed the top of her head. "If anyone is an angel, it is you. You brought life to this place. You made a house into a home." "We did it together," Grace said. "Everything we have, we built together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children. James was teaching Rose how to skip stones in the water trough, and her delighted laughter carried across the yard. "I love you, Emmett Caldwell," Grace said. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too, Grace. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." As the years passed, their family grew even more. Grace gave birth to another son, Thomas, when Rose was 5, and then 2 years later, twin girls named Clara and Catherine. The house was always full of noise and laughter, with children running in and out and the sound of Grace singing as she worked. The ranch prospered. Emmett's reputation grew, and soon he was training horses for some of the wealthiest ranchers in Nevada. They bought more land, expanding their property to over 200 acres. The small house became a large ranch house, with enough bedrooms for all the children and a big kitchen where the family gathered for meals. James grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose was spirited and independent, with a gift for gentling even the wildest horses. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, always reading when he could get his hands on a book. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. Through it all, Emmett and Grace's love remained the foundation of everything. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when they could. Sometimes it was a walk down by the creek after the children were in bed, or a dance in the kitchen to music only they could hear. Emmett never stopped being amazed that this beautiful, strong woman had chosen him, and Grace never stopped being grateful for the man who had saved her life and given her a home. When Emmett was 45 and Grace was 40, they celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary. The children, now ranging from 15 to 8 years old, had planned a surprise party. They decorated the house with wildflowers and cooked a huge meal. The whole family gathered around the table that evening, and Emmett looked at each of his children's faces, at his wife's smiling eyes, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I want to say something," he announced, standing up with his glass. Everyone quieted down. 18 years ago, I found your mother in a snowstorm. She was alone and scared and nearly frozen to death. I brought her home, and it was the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life, everything wonderful, came from that moment. You children, this ranch, this family, all of it exists because of your mother's courage and strength." He turned to Grace, and his voice grew thick with emotion. "Grace, you are the love of my life. You are my partner, my best friend, and the reason I wake up grateful every single day. I would do it all over again 1,000 times if it meant ending up here with you." Grace was crying, and so were most of the children. She stood up and wrapped her arms around Emmett, and he held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "You gave me everything, Emmett," she whispered. "You gave me your life and your love, and I will cherish both until my last breath." The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons. The children grew up one by one. James married a girl from town named Sarah, and they built their own house on a corner of the property. Rose surprised everyone by marrying a traveling photographer who passed through Pyramid City, and they moved to San Francisco, though they visited often. Thomas went to university in the East to study law, and the twins both married brothers from a neighboring ranch. Emmett and Grace became grandparents, and then grandparents again. The ranch house was always full during holidays, with 3 generations gathered around the table. Emmett's hair turned gray, and Grace's blonde hair became streaked with silver, but to Emmett, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. They never forgot where they came from, the hard times that had brought them together. Every winter, when the first snow fell, Grace would stand at the window and watch the white flakes drift down, and Emmett would come up behind her and wrap his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he would ask, though he always knew the answer. "About how lucky I am," she would say. "About how one terrible night led to a lifetime of happiness." On their 30th wedding anniversary, Emmett took Grace back to Pyramid City. The town had grown over the years, with new buildings and even a railroad station. But the general store where he had found her was still standing, though it was under new ownership now. They stood on the very spot where Grace had huddled against the wall, shaking in the snow. "Right here," Emmett said, pointing at the ground. "This is where you were." Grace looked at the spot, then up at her husband. Her green eyes were still as clear and bright as they had been 30 years ago. "And you stopped. Out of all the people who might have passed by, you stopped." "Of course I stopped. How could I not? Some people would not have. Some people would have kept going, thinking it was not their problem. Then they would have missed out on the greatest blessing of their lives," Emmett said, taking her hands in his. "Because that is what you have been to me, Grace. A blessing. Every single day." They kissed there on the street, 2 people in their 50s who loved each other as deeply as they had on their wedding day. People walked past them, some smiling at the sight of the old couple so obviously in love. That night, they stayed at the hotel in town, a luxury they rarely indulged in. They made love slowly and tenderly, taking their time, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew their own. Afterward, Grace lay with her head on Emmett's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You have any regrets?" she asked. "Not a single one. You?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner, that we did not have more time. We have had 30 beautiful years, and with any luck we will have 30 more," Grace smiled. "I will hold you to that. They did not have 30 more years, but they had 20, and they were good years." They watched their children thrive and their grandchildren grow. The ranch remained successful, now run primarily by James and his sons, with Emmett serving as advisor and trainer for the most difficult horses. Grace continued to tend her garden, now with the help of several grandchildren who loved learning from their grandmother. When Emmett was 72 and Grace was 71, Emmett's heart began to fail. The doctor said there was nothing that could be done, that it was simply his time. Emmett accepted this with characteristic grace, but Grace railed against it, furious at the unfairness of losing the man she loved. On a warm evening in late June, the whole family gathered at the ranch house. Emmett was in bed, weak but still alert, and he wanted to see everyone one last time. His children and grandchildren filed through, each saying their goodbyes, each telling him how much he meant to them. When they were done, Grace shooed them all out and climbed into bed beside her husband. "I am not ready to let you go," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know, my love. I am not ready to go either, but I am not afraid." "How can you not be afraid?" "Because I have lived a good life, a full life. I have been loved by the most extraordinary woman, and I have loved her in return. What more could a man ask for?" Grace sobbed against his chest, and Emmett stroked her hair with trembling fingers. "You have to promise me something," he said. "Anything. Promise me you will keep living, really living, not just existing but finding joy and happiness. Our children and grandchildren need you. The ranch needs you, and I need to know that you will be all right. I do not know if I can." "Yes, you can. You are the strongest person I know. You survived things that would have broken other people, and you built a beautiful life from the ashes. You can survive this too." They lay together as the sun set, talking about all the memories they had made. The first kiss by the fire, their wedding day, the birth of each of their children, the countless mornings waking up next to each other. The hard times and the good times, all woven together into a tapestry of a life well lived. As the night deepened, Emmett's breathing grew shallower. Grace held him close, whispering that she loved him, that she would always love him. "Do you remember," Emmett said, his voice barely audible, "when I found you in the snow? I will never forget it. I knew right then, even though I did not realize it at the time, I knew you were going to change my life. You changed mine, you saved it. We saved each other," Emmett said. He took a shaky breath. "Grace Gardner Caldwell, you have been the joy of my life. Thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for loving me." Emmett smiled, that gentle, honest smile that Grace had fallen in love with so many years ago. "Tell the children I love them. Tell the grandchildren to take care of you." "I will. I love you, Grace, forever." "I love you, Emmett, forever and always." His eyes closed and his breathing slowed. Grace held him as he slipped away, feeling the moment when his spirit left his body. She stayed there for a long time, holding the man who had been her everything, letting herself cry until there were no more tears. The funeral was held 3 days later. The whole town turned out, along with ranchers from across the territory. Emmett had touched many lives, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, "Emmett Caldwell, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he gave his life and his love freely." In the months that followed, Grace grieved. She felt Emmett's absence like a physical wound, a hollow place in her chest that nothing could fill. But she kept her promise to him. She kept living. She still tended her garden and spent time with her children and grandchildren. She still walked down by the creek in the evenings, though now she walked alone. One winter evening, nearly a year after Emmett's death, Grace stood at the window and watched the snow fall. It was the first real snow they had had since Emmett passed, and it reminded her so strongly of that night 48 years ago that her breath caught in her throat. James came into the room and found her there. "You all right, Mama?" "I was just thinking about your father," she said. "About the night we met, the snowstorm." "Yes, I was so scared that night. I thought my life was over, but it was not over at all. It was just beginning." She turned to her son, and her eyes were wet but clear. "Your father gave me everything, James. His coat, his home, his name, his love. He gave me you and your siblings. He gave me a life I never dreamed was possible. He loved you more than anything in this world, James said. And I loved him. I still love him. I always will. Grace looked back out at the snow. But I am grateful for every moment we had, even the hard ones, because they all led to something beautiful. James hugged his mother, and they stood together watching the snow fall, remembering the man who had brought them together and taught them what love really meant. Grace lived for another 12 years after Emmett's death. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was buried beside Emmett on the hill, and her headstone read, Grace Gardner Caldwell, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was loved beyond measure. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations. James's sons worked it, and then their sons after them. The story of how Emmett and Grace met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings. How he had found her shaking in the snow and given her his coat. How he had taken her home and given her shelter. How that one act of kindness had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that would endure for generations. The house that Emmett built still stands, lovingly maintained by his descendants. And every winter, when the first snow falls over the Nevada desert, the family gathers there to remember the cowboy who saw a woman shaking in the snow and gave her his life and his love, and the woman who loved him in return with a fierce and unbreakable devotion that death itself could not diminish. Their love story became the foundation upon which an entire family was built, proof that even in the harshest circumstances, even in the coldest storms, love can not only survive but thrive, growing stronger with each passing year and touching every life it encounters along the way.